Music is an extraordinarily powerful medium for storytelling and conveying deep, personal experiences. I mean, we've all listened to a catchy, cheerful song about falling in love and then, subsequently, a long, sad song about breakups. But those are fairly common topic points in the music industry and the wider social world. But what if, instead, there was an album that expressed something different, something more complex and increasingly deeply personal? What if there was an album that talked about dementia? I remember the day I had first heard about the album. I saw all these people that I followed and friends talking about this album that supposedly replicated the feeling of memory loss. I've always been interested in pieces of art that either transcend their own medium or utilize it to tell compelling and emotional stories, such as The Guardian's 7 Deadly Digital Sins and Adult Swim's unedited footage of a bear. And this album is certainly no different. Everywhere at the End of Time was first released in September of 2016 by Leyland James Kirby under a pseudonym of The Caretaker, with the finale of the album fully released in March of 2019. It's hard to categorize what kind of genre the album falls under because it's quite unlike anything you've likely heard. In various interviews, Kirby claims that he had taken some inspiration from Midnight, the Stars and You by Al Bowley, which was used as the theme for the credits for Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, a film which also included a character called The Caretaker. It's very strange music from this time between the 2 world wars, he said in an interview with the New York Times. Optimistic, but also very much about loss and longing, ghosts and torment. It seems haunted by the spirit of those who went to the trenches and never returned. Everywhere at the End of Time is considered Kirby's magnum opus and is his final project under the Caretaker alias. It is presented from the perspective of the Caretaker himself, as his mind slowly degrades through the 6 stages of the album to dementia. For those who are unaware, dementia is a cognitive disorder that is fairly hard to define, as it isn't a singular occurrence, but rather a group of symptoms and diseases that cause damage to the brain. You're probably wondering, how does an album properly replicate this experience? Well, I sat down with Dr. Sandra Garrido from the University of Western Sydney and discussed with her how dementia develops over time and the amount of damage it does to the brain. Simultaneously, I will analyze each of the album's stages and explain how they link up with the development of dementia over time. Stage 1. Early warning signs.
One of the early warning signs can be sort of having difficulty producing sentences coherently and sometimes becoming more depressed than is usual for that individual, or becoming a bit more aggressive or something like that. They can be some early warning signs as well.
The first stage begins with a large selection of slow, cheerful, jazzy, and classical music being played through an old gramophone. These happy songs, as well as their positive titles like Things That Are Beautiful and Transient, are representative of mild cognitive impairment, a neurocognitive disorder whose symptoms are barely noticeable, if only in hindsight and later diagnosis. Stage 2. Diagnosis.
I went to visit my aunt, who despite suffering from dementia, has an intact sense of humour. How have you been? I have no idea.
What happens is you get these protein buildups within the brain that can lead to actual death of neurons. So you get atrophy of particular sections of the brain. So we don't really have a clear idea of how much brain damage there is in an individual when symptoms typically present.
It's bleaker in comparison to stage 1 and represents the point in which the caretaker is diagnosed with dementia. For the music is still strangely beautiful, trance-like, claims James Catchpole of Fluid Radio, even though the decay is real and already there, ghosting into the sound. Though it still features ounces of cheerfulness, the familiar notes and tunes that we heard in the prior stage are sampled, but now warped slightly. Its song titles are now depressing and devoid of hope, such as The Way Ahead Feels Lonely. Stage 3. Telling Family.
How do I answer my dad with dementia when he talks about his mum and dad being alive? Do I go along with it, or tell him that they've passed away?
This isn't playing along to pacify the old guy. This is an opportunity to communicate and treasure memories, real but out of time.
People that we might be working with in our research, the family will say, we know that this is a study about dementia, but please don't use the word dementia with the individual. I guess that there is a fair amount of stigma around it, and so even if people do understand that they have a diagnosis of dementia, a lot of them may not be willing to admit that to anybody else.
This is the point in time where the psychologically damaging effects of the caretaker's dementia begin to properly set in and have a legitimate impact on the music itself. As this stage continues, the songs become more discordant, off-tune, and unnerving. The genre of dark ambience, indicative of Kirby's earlier works like An Empty Bliss Beyond This World, fades in as a taste of what's to come for the listener and the caretaker himself. Stage 4. Awareness fading.
It was during this time frame I had some surreal conversations with my father. One day, while we were eating lunch, he asked me to tell him about my father. I sat there describing my father back to himself. He listened intently, smiling and nodding. When I finished, he told me that my father sounded like a real neat guy and that he hoped he could meet him sometime and hang out.
When the disease does become more progressed, it may get to the point where physically it becomes difficult for the family to care for them. In Australia and in many other countries, there are a lot of in-home services that can be provided to help the individual stay living at home.
This part is representative of the transition between the early stages of dementia and the progressively dangerous middle stages, where memory loss, anxiety, and general cognitive impairment becomes especially damaging. Gone is any lingering sense of kitsch, says Sidney Franklin in a review of the album on Variety. Compositions are now harsh and abrasive. The anxiety is the main theme of this stage. The songs themselves are now long, disturbing, and almost unrecognizable from the previous samples, as well as the fact that there are 2 individual songs in this stage titled Post-Awareness Confusion. Stage 5. Point of No Return.
Fun times at the beach. She's 58 here. Her eyes aren't always open, and if they are, she's staring into the void.
After a period of time, it might get to the point where the individual is admitted into some type of residential care. From there, sometimes the acceleration of the disease can be fairly quick, and eventually the body's ability to regulate physiological things sort of begins to deteriorate, as well as the deterioration to the brain progresses and spreads, ultimately resulting in the death of the individual.
This stage is appropriately presented as the point of no return in terms of the caretaker's mental regression. The song titles become increasingly dread-inducing and scientific, like Advanced Plaque Entanglements. The songs themselves, or what's left of them, are bleak, staticky shadows of the songs that they used to be, and it all represents the transition into the late stages of dementia. Stage 6. Silence. Stage 6 is the finale of the album, and where the caretaker, after succumbing to the late stages of dementia, begins to pass on. The caretaker even appears to be under mild terminal lucidity, the final moment of mental and cognitive awareness before death.
With any type of dementia, lucidity comes in waves. It's not sort of a static thing that just declines. They can have good days and bad days. So it isn't unusual for a person, even with advanced dementia, to have moments or hours of lucidity.
There are no more songs, just empty noise and static. A swirl of repetitive noises and discordant notes. A portrait of complete chaos and confusion, according to Andrew Rice of Resident Advisor. It seems designed to drive the listener to madness. The titles of the songs representing the nihilistic acceptance by our protagonist, particularly in the final song, Place in the World Fades Away. This song, and this album, eventually end with 1 full minute of silence. Stage 7. Treating dementia with music. This video essay doesn't have to end in depressing fashion, because there's still hope. Not necessarily a cure-all, but something to make the everyday lives and neurocognitive decline smoother and less stressful for dementia patients. Music therapy. That is exactly what Dr. Garrido had been studying and testing for years, using a unique music playlist to help calm sufferers of dementia and Alzheimer's.
The reason for my research is that music therapy isn't always available to everybody. Some people don't have access to the funding needed, the facilities needed. And I guess really what I wanted with my research was for people without training as a music therapist, so caregivers, family members, anybody who's caring for someone with dementia, to understand how they can use music in the moment as needed, when needed and on a daily basis, as something that can supplement traditional music therapy. There's the potential for them to have a plan in place to use music to avert those situations so that they don't become so difficult during the day, and to just make life more pleasant both for the individual with dementia and the person who is coping with those challenges every day in caring for them.
Even Everywhere at the End of Time, though particularly depressing nearing the final stages, is a powerful piece of art that has had a major resurgence in popularity in the past couple of years, mainly on social media, particularly TikTok. It has allowed younger generations who may have relatives battling with brain-damaging diseases to understand and subsequently empathize with those suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's.
It sounds like a wonderful concept. I think that anything that can help younger people understand what people with dementia may be going through, but also continue to value and respect those people despite what they're experiencing, I think sounds like a really wonderful thing. And perhaps these sorts of artistic works might go some way towards diminishing some of the stereotypes and the stigma associated with dementia.